Welcome to Streamlining Login Experiences with Passwordless Authentication. We know passwords as the foundational basis of securing web applications and authentication. But what if there was a better way? In today's webinar, we'll explore the benefits of going beyond the password through passwordless methods of authentication, like Okta FastPass. As always, we need to share the safe harbor, which is required simply to remind any customers, partners, or any other external audience that these are all forward-looking discussions and should not be considered commitments to deliver. My name is Julie Mason, and I'm a Security Product Marketing Manager here at Okta, and I'm excited to have this discussion with you today. In this webinar, we'll cover how the driving need for passwordless authentication and how organizations can securely streamline their employees' experience at login through Okta FastPass, a feature in the Okta Identity Cloud that enables secure passwordless authentication across Windows, Mac, and Android devices to any resource behind Okta. We'll also go through a brief demo of how this saves significant time for the end user at login. And we'll close with some Q&A. With that, let's get started. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, talking about passwordless authentication, let's first set the scene in talking about the current landscape that security leaders find themselves in. The security leaders we're talking to at Okta are really struggling to keep up with the rapidly evolving threat landscape. Meanwhile, their role is evolving rapidly. They're no longer just the Department of No. They're now being tasked with helping ensure that the business is agile and can embrace new technologies and quickly. This includes enabling remote work, as well as ensuring that the organization is able to adopt cloud services quickly and deploy new apps. And they're tasked with doing all of this with very scarce security resources, so prioritization becomes critical. Passwords can't eat up security leaders' time. As we all know, they're incredibly busy in the current state of the threat landscape we now find ourselves in. Before we go any further, let's take a look at the brief history of passwords. For a long time, we have lived in the golden age of passwords, but they're quickly becoming a thing of the past. The first origins of passwords go back to the Roman times, when watchwords were developed as a form of identification and shared a lot of important characteristics with modern passwords as we know them, including a secure back channel. This basic concept evolved through World War II, where armies used the idea of a countersign to validate on the battlefield. But it was really in the 1960s at MIT that we see the deployment of modern passwords as we know them and herald the start of the golden age of passwords. The university had developed a huge compatible time-sharing system, or CTSS, that all researchers had access to. However, they shared a common mainframe as well as a single desk file. To help keep individual files private, the concept of a password was developed so that users could only access their own specific files for their allotted 4 hours a week. Screen time was a lot different in the 1960s. After that, we moved into the internet era of passwords. In the early age of passwords, passwords were 8 characters long and frequently did not differentiate between uppercase and lowercase. As we started to move into creating online accounts for different services, we saw the intro of extremely insecure passwords, like the word password, for example. And so websites and IT teams created increasingly complex requirements for passwords, which, in theory, should have made things more secure. But we're actually still easy to circumvent by using passwords like password123, or adding random characters into the middle of passwords that at the end of the day were still significantly insecure. Naturally, this golden age of passwords has made us incredibly hackable. And passwords are no longer good enough at protecting employees or corporate resources from attacks. First, common attacks like phishing, man-in-the-middle, and password spray attacks have made passwords a primary attack vector. According to the most recent Verizon data breach report of 2021, around 61% of all data breaches involve some form of stolen credentials. That's more than half. And according to Forrester Research, the number of stolen usernames and passwords in circulation has increased by 300% since 2018. So, we've tried addressing these challenges with passwords over the years by requiring things like super complex requirements for 16-character passwords with uppercase, lowercase characters, numbers, special characters, non-repeating words, but these are all incredibly hard for users to remember. This also means that users are more frequently needing to reset and recover their passwords. Not only is this a security risk for organizations, it also leads to the high cost of password resets. IT teams and help desks are inundated constantly with account management activities when they could be spending their time on more impactful tasks. As a mean to combat the shortcomings from a productivity and the security perspective, we've evolved authentication methods to meet the moment. Now let's take a look at authentication methods we see both in the enterprise and for customer and consumer-facing applications. We know now that passwords are insecure and they deliver a poor experience, but there's something we're all very familiar with. We also want to think about why passwords have been around for so long. Even though they're hard to remember, there's no considerations around OS or device support. Passwords are so ubiquitous that they're embedded into any point of authentication, whether it's on device or logging on to an app. To solve the shortcomings of passwords, we came up with second factor or multi-factor authentication, an additional layer of authentication that is based on something that you know and have. While this is more secure, it delivers a very poor user experience by increasing friction for the end user at login and frequently requiring the user to have a phone or an additional hardware device to access corporate resources. As annoying as passwords are and have been, we do have it rated higher on end user experience because adding a second factor of authentication often leads to actually more friction at login, even though it also increases the assurance of the user. More recently, we've explored biometric and passwordless authentication, with things like Face ID and Touch ID as a strong assurance in the replacement to a password, with better user experience as well. However, these do usually require some specialized hardware like Touch ID on a Mac or facial recognition on your smartphone. With all of these pros and cons with the current authentication methods, what is an ideal authentication experience? Well, we know that it needs to have exceptional user experience. Anytime friction is introduced at the end user with login, that never leads to a good outcome for the organization. We also know that it needs to have the security protections against things like phishing and other credential-based attacks. We know that we need to provide admins with the controls and visibility to detect when something goes wrong. And it has to be scalable as an organization grows and offer a great total cost of ownership so that support teams are not inundated with an unwieldy amount of requests from users. Again, this can increasingly add up. In a recent survey where Forrester spoke to several large US-based organizations in different verticals, many of them allocated over $1 million annually for password-related support costs alone. Passwords are really costing us. This is where we think something like passwordless authentication could help solve some of these challenges and deliver on the promise of a better user experience coupled with better security. However, enabling passwordless authentication isn't always easy. Organizations are actively seeking ways to promote employee productivity and flexibility, but while still keeping sensitive data and resources secure. In the past, we were able to keep these resources secure through a more traditional security perimeter and by keeping these accessible only through corporate managed devices. But over the last couple years, with the current state of the world, this is no longer realistic for organizations. The network perimeter is no longer secure, and identity is now the new perimeter for organizations to keep all of their access to their resources secure. Not only that, many organizations are rapidly shifting to the cloud and are requiring new methods of delivering seamless access. With the rise of remote work and BYOD, organizations need to enable all of their users to access their resources from any device. Not only that, large organizations with more than 1,000 applications have difficulties managing passwords across all of these applications as well as hybrid environments. Here's where Okta FastPass can help. FastPass delivers a secure, passwordless experience to the end user regardless of location or device. Whether employees are accessing company resources at home or in the office, they're able to seamlessly access everything they need to get their jobs done while saving time at login. It's a consistent experience across all devices, including Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android. Okta FastPass unlocks a significant amount of benefits for the organization. Again, it enables secure, passwordless user experience for the end user. This means logging on becomes simple. They're able to access all of their resources without ever entering a password. Okta FastPass also enables always-on productivity regardless of location. This means that the users can access any of their corporate resources from anywhere they need to, whether they're traveling or working from a coffee shop or in the office. The user experience is always the same and it's always seamless. And finally, because Okta FastPass utilizes Okta's modern universal directory for administrator visibility and not requiring Active Directory or any other LDAP directory, it unlocks an incredible amount of benefits by utilizing a more modern cloud directory. However, enabling passwordless authentication can be made easy. It's doable with Okta FastPass. Here we can see what the process looks like for an end user to enroll in Okta FastPass and get access to their applications. So when an end user attempts to log in, they're going to need to register their device to Okta, and that's through Okta Verify. For those who don't know, Okta Verify is a multi-factor authentication app developed by Okta. It lets users verify their identity when they sign into Okta, and it makes it less likely that someone pretending to be the user can then gain access to the account. Once the user has their device registered to Okta with Okta Verify, on the back end, Okta FastPass and Okta are evaluating the security posture of that user. We do this through things like risk scoring, where we're able to take in across multiple factors like a user's location, the device they're using, their behavior, sensitivity of the application themselves. And with all of those factors, we're able to determine a risk score and say how medium, low, or high risk is this user who's attempting to access corporate resources. We also have access to third-party tools like MDMs that give us even more insight on the user who's attempting to access those applications. After a user's risk score is calculated, then Okta is able to determine whether or not they are granted access or denied entry into corporate resources. If they're a fairly low-risk user, they'll seamlessly be granted, with no password involved, access to their applications from anywhere. And again, this is across all different operating systems. It's always great to hear Okta customer success stories and how organizations who use Okta can enable zero trust within their organizations. Okta customer entity data had over 120,000 employees spanning across 50 countries worldwide. They need to deliver infrastructure, applications, and business process services to their clients. Through the Okta Identity Cloud, entity data was able to deliver a secure, cohesive user experience across their entire identity ecosystem. Their CISO, Steve Williams, said that by enabling Okta FastPass is a great example for how they were able to empower all of these employees to intuitively use a passwordless experience within their organization, while still being able to maintain invisible device policies as well as security. Now let's take a look at the demo and see how an end user can save a significant amount of time by enabling FastPass on their device. In today's demo, we're going to look at two different scenarios. The first scenario is going to show a more traditional authentication experience for the end user, where they're using a username and password to log in and access their corporate resources on their corporate-owned Mac device. This is something we're all fairly familiar with in this new remote world that we're all living in. In the next scenario, we'll see what the seamless passwordless authentication experience of Okta FastPass looks like. We'll also see in the second part of the demo how this really does truly save employees an incredible amount of time, while also adding another level of security to their interaction with corporate resources. Let's take a look at the first scenario. This user is attempting to access their resources on their corporate-owned Mac device. This is a fairly familiar experience to a lot of us. We're asked for a username and then a password. Prior to sign-in and prior to this demo, the admin for this organization programmed in a second factor authentication of Touch ID to this device. So now as the end user, I'm prompted by Okta, my single sign-on, for another factor of authentication. And this time I'm going to use the Touch ID that's built into my Mac. And just like that, fairly easily, I'm granted access to my corporate resources, as well as some personal applications. Now, what you don't realize is on the back end, I've been timing this interaction. As the end user, that took me about a minute to access all of my corporate resources. And 1 minute at login doesn't seem like that much, but it does add up over time. A minute a day is at least 5 minutes a week, which turns into at least 25 to 30 minutes a month, which can turn into hours in a year wasted just at login for an organization. Now let's show what this looks like with Okta FastPass. Now let's take a look at what the end user experience looks like for an organization who already has Okta FastPass enabled. This means that employees can now access all of their corporate resources from any device, managed or unmanaged. And they're able to do so in a secure, passwordless authentication flow. As we'll see here, Okta FastPass again is already enabled, and as the end user, I'm able to simply click on this first option here and sign in with Okta FastPass seamlessly. Or, if I want to, I'm also still able to enter my username at login. However, I don't have to, so I'm going to sign in with Okta FastPass. Okta Verify is going to authenticate me using Touch ID and just like that, I'm able to access all of my corporate resources. And I was able to do it in a fraction of the time. This time, it only took me about 10 seconds. That means we shredded 50 seconds off of our time on the first scenario. This is incredible. It means organizations are freeing up not only time for the end user to do more work more securely during their week, it also frees up time for the IT and security teams who will no longer be having to worry about multi-factor authentication or password resets. This is really incredible. Thank you all for joining this presentation on Okta and our passwordless authentication method, Okta FastPass. Now let's get into some Q&A. So one question I saw is, how do end users get Okta Verify and why do they need to enroll with Okta Verify in order to enable Okta FastPass? So as an admin, you can deploy Okta Verify to devices as a managed application and then communicate with end users that they need to enroll with Okta Verify in order to enable FastPass. Okta Verify enrollment is required for device registration and its presence in Universal Directory. Okta Verify detects the presence of managed certifications on the device in order to attest that the device is managed or trusted. We have a ton of great documentation on Okta Verify for Windows, for Mac, for Android, and for iOS. You can definitely use the links that we share out here to learn more about the end user enrollment experience, as well as see what the device registration process looks like as well. The next question we received is, are unmanaged devices supported with Okta FastPass, or is device management required? So no, Okta does not require device management for FastPass. Again, we mentioned this a little earlier in the presentation, but this is one of the great benefits of Okta FastPass. With the rise of remote work and organizations wanting to enable employees to bring their own device, their iPhones, their iPads, in order to do work, whether they're at their office or at a coffee shop, they need to be able to have a consistent experience across devices. The users with unmanaged devices do need to install the latest version of Okta Verify and then enroll by adding an account in Okta Verify before they're able to use Okta FastPass. But again, the experience across managed and unmanaged devices is the same. Another question we received is, does Okta FastPass support YubiKeys? So no, Okta FastPass is an authentication method in itself. It's similar to YubiKey. YubiKey provides additional compliance benefits at the cost of end user experience. While admins can choose to provide both Okta FastPass and YubiKey in order to increase assurance policies, they're also able to require YubiKey only for certain applications. And let's answer one more question here. Are end users forced to use biometrics when using Okta FastPass? So biometric authentication is a configurable option. Admins can set biometric auth to preferred or required. This is currently only enforced on enrollment. So admins can't enforce user verification or biometric authentication during the authentication process using Okta FastPass. And again, we have some great documentation on enabling Okta FastPass within your organization that we will link out here that you can all take a look at after the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us for today's session. Please feel free to reach out with any further questions around passwordless authentication or Okta FastPass. We really appreciate your time today.